This morning, we're going to talk about how there will be times God's going to allow something to happen, something you're just like, this is different. Or maybe he's actually going to reveal something that you're just going to kind of think like, what's going on here? Why is this happening? And oftentimes, and what we're going to look at is oftentimes maybe God is allowing this thing or the situation to happen. Maybe you're suffering. Maybe things aren't working out the way you want them to work out. Or maybe everything's working out actually to what you had always hoped for, but for some reason it's not enough. Maybe God is allowing this to happen because there's something more about who he is that he wants you to know. There's something a little bit more about his character, his heart, that he's just needing this to happen so you can go dig a little deeper. So you don't have to sort of kind of have a default way of looking at him, but that it can go deeper. Now, before we do that, can you turn to the person next to you in just a moment, and I have a little prompt as I get everything set up, that you can share with the person next to you. But share with the person next to you, like, what's your favorite, just like, genre of TikTok or YouTube or whatever you watch? Snapchat, is that still around? What else? Not Venmo. What's that old one? What's that one? Not Venmo, but Vine? Yeah, is Vines? Okay, yeah. Or MySpace or Zynga. But yeah, what's your favorite genre? Like my family and I, we like watching those. Is it called Dodo? Like it's like they always find some animal that's stranded and they nurse it back to life, and it's really cute. But they're like a suburban family nursing this lion, back to life, and then the lion becomes part of the family. Those videos? Yeah, we love those videos. And I also love those fail videos. I don't know why. My wife thinks it's disturbing, but I love just seeing people just walk into something and fall, and it just, I don't know why, it just cracks me up. But yeah, so turn to the person next to you and share with them what you like to watch. All right, let's come back. So I'm a sucker for those really sappy, very sappy emotional videos. The ones that I've gotten into are these ones where I guess because of technology, there's these like glasses or lens that they provide for people who are colorblind, right? Have you ever seen that? Oh, it's moving, right? It's really moving because they have like shots of like, I remember there's one that was like 3 brothers that were colorblind, and then they saw and they just were an emotional wreck, and it was just the first time they can see, or like, and the best ones are when it's like a rugged person, right? When there's a rugged person that's like, like whatever, right? They put it on and get emotional. There's one in particular I remember watching. It was like a grandfather who was, I think, in his early 70s. And so, it's like they're showing the whole thing of him opening the package. And as he's opening the package, and then they set up these, like, a lot of times these families, what they do is then, after, the person puts the glasses on because they could see color for the first time, they have all these different colored balloons, so they could see color for the first time. And so this one guy, he's in his early 70s, and as he's unboxing his glasses, he's like, I'm not gonna be one of those guys that's gonna cry, right? Like I've seen those videos. That's not gonna be me, right? He's like, I lived through a lot already, all right? I already lived through a lot. I'm a vet. I've done this kind of work and done this and that. And he's just like talking. He's like, I'm not gonna cry, right? I'm not. It's not gonna be. I've seen those videos, and so he puts it on. And everyone's all quiet, right? It's like a whole family. Like there's like his kids, grandkids, and everyone's just watching his reaction. And they're like, what do you think? He's like, oh, it's kind of different, right? He's just kind of like, oh, it's different. And then they're like, okay, walk over to this little pool of balloons. So he's like, see, I'm not gonna cry, see? And then he looks down, looks at this just a pool of different balloons in the different colors. He just stops and then covers his mouth, right? And then he starts crying. And it's that moment, that moment. And I mean, he's in his 70s, right? How long has he lived seeing life in black and white or a shade of gray? And for the first time, he sees life in color. And for the first time, he sees the vibrancy of colors, right? It's moving. It's moving, right? And so I love those videos. I don't know why. I'm a sappy kind of a guy. And my family hates it because then I always forward them these videos. I'm like, check out this video, right? And so I bring that up because maybe, just maybe, spiritually speaking, we've been looking at God, we've been looking at life in just this dull color, right? Like, we're missing the vibrancy of who he is. The vibrancy that's just not an idea, right? But the vibrancy that, oh, wow, your heart cannot stand still. That kind of vibrancy. And again, today we're going to look at how there are moments where God is allowing the situation to happen, or he's meeting you in a certain place because he wants you to know there's a lot more to who he is. There's a lot more to know about who he is than you can ever dream of. And so generally, sometimes we kind of default to just, it's a cruder way of saying it is we just sort of default to everything about Christianity is a great idea, and it just happens to parallel with my life. But then you're missing out. You're missing out because there's so much more. And so we're going to look at a very familiar passage in John chapter 4, and we're going to see how Jesus meets this woman at the well and shows her that he's far greater, kinder, and more satisfying than she can ever dream of. So if you have your Bibles, turn with me to John chapter 4, and we're going to look at verses, we'll look at verses 4 and go all the way down to the end of this passage. So I'm starting in verse 4. And so it starts with, and I'll read this, share some observations, and then we're going to look at 3 things Jesus uncovers about who he is, in this conversation, so that she knows there's so much more to who he is. All right, so let's see, verse 4. And he had to pass through Samaria. And so he came to a town of Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Now, real quick, verse 4 is really important for us to understand because Jesus didn't have to go through Samaria. In fact, the disciples, and let's say their cultural, ethnic background, they would not want to go through Samaria because of racial tension, cultural tension, and religious tension between the two groups. And so it's almost like we don't want to go through there because we don't want to be associated with those people. We don't want to look at those people. We don't want to be around those people because if we're around those people, what will happen to our GPAs, right? Kind of a thing. Or what will happen to, we just, those are the kind of people we don't associate with. That kind of racial tension. And so, but Jesus doesn't, contain himself to that cultural war, that racial tension. He goes beyond that. Why, right? So it says he had to go. So it's not like, I'm in a rush, guys, right? It's not like, I'm in a rush to go die on the cross, right? It's not that, right? Hey, I got to hurry. There's this, there's a demon-possessed guy, named Legion, so we got to get there earlier, right? Or, Jesus is not like in a hurry, But so what does it mean that he had to? He had to meet this woman, just like he has to meet us. That's how much he cares about this woman, and that's how much he cares about us, right? So, coming to Samaria called Sychar, near the field that Jacob had given to his sons. Jacob's well was there, so Jesus, wearied as he was from his journey, was sitting beside the well. All right, it was about the 6th hour. So Jesus is tired. All right, he's tired. Right? There's so much meaning in that tiredness. Later on, disciples give him food because they think he's tired and hungry. But he tells them, no, my food is what? To do the will of the Lord, right? That's his food. So he doesn't settle for food to satisfy him. He puts himself in a place to do the Lord's will. And that's what brings him that satisfaction. That feeds his hunger. But it also speaks to the gospel. Jesus didn't have to be hungry, right? Think about it. Jesus didn't have to be. I imagine it's like the best buffets of best buffets, right, in heaven. Can you imagine the best buffets, and you can eat as much as you want, and you don't have to worry about anything, right? But here, he did what? He met us where we are. He met us in places where we are tired. He met us in the places where we are hungry, where we're thirsty, and he allowed himself so that he can meet us where we are, not just to identify with us, but to take on our weariness, to take on our tiredness, and to die for it. Only shows that there's a better way to live. And also to show us that we are not defined by that imperfection and that weariness, but now we have that fullness in God himself. All right, okay. So a woman from Samaria came to draw water. Jesus said to her, give me a drink, right? And there's something very symbolic here. Again, he doesn't have to be thirsty. And right before he dies on the cross, he says he's thirsty. Remember that? So there's a symbolism here. For his disciples had gone away into the city to buy food. The Samaritan woman said to him, how is it that you, a Jew, ask for a drink from a woman of Samaria? She's really confused, by the way. First of all, she's going at a time where no one's going to be out there, and soon we'll kind of uncover that, a lot of it is maybe a lot of shame and guilt, and, if she's around a lot of people, everyone starts looking at her, gives her that look, that kind of interaction. And so she's really confused. And not only that, there's a person here, and he's a guy, and he's talking to me, but he's our rival. He's our rival counterpart in a sense. These are the people, he's part of that group of people that look down at us. And he's that group of people that we don't like, right? To the point where it can get violent. And so she's really confused. And so when Jesus asks her for water, she's like, what? And so verse 10, Jesus answered her, if you knew, like you really knew, like the lexicon of the word knew it's like from experience, from going through it, right? Just not know the idea, but it's actually knowing it. Just knowing how good it is. Just like you may read about the best restaurants in Yelp reviews, but it's another, right, to know how good that tastes because you've actually tasted it yourself. You see, there's a dramatic difference. And I'm sure if there was like a brain scan, it's like when you remember something because of what you knew versus like you just read about something, I'm sure it's the serotonin, dopamine, and all that stuff that gets released, it's dramatically different, right? So if you knew the gift of God, right, and who it is that is saying to you, give me a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. So you see what Jesus is saying to this woman? If you really knew, if you knew that there was so much more to who God is, if you only knew, you would not be in this situation. And so the woman said to him, it's really kind of funny, she kind of pulls back here, all right? So Jesus is now talking about something very spiritual and something very meaningful, but it's probably uncomfortable. So she goes, sir, you have nothing to draw water with. So Jesus is talking about spiritual, and then she pulls it back to physical. She's like, whoa, what? Like, I'm just here to get water, right? You know, that's like some of us, like, I just came here for boba, right? Or I just came here to get my stuff at Costco, right? Or I just came here for work. Or I just came to go to church, okay? Like, whoa. That's the kind of reaction that she has. And so, sir, she says, you have nothing to draw water with, and the well is deep. Where do you get that living water? So she's like, okay, what is this? Like, what is this living water? Are you greater than our father Jacob? He gave us the well and drank from it himself, as did his sons and his livestock. Jesus said to her, everyone who drinks of this water will be thirsty again. If you continue, just like everyone else, you will continue to be thirsty. You will still feel that sense of just dread of not being good enough. You see what Jesus is saying to her? But whoever drinks of the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him or her will become in him a spring of water welling up to eternal life. The woman said to her, sir, again, she's still stuck on the physical, right? The physical. And sometimes I think that's what God is saying, when God is speaking to us. He's talking not just physical, but he's talking about spiritual. But for some reason, it's just easier to default to what? The physical, what's in front of us, what's tangible. So, sir, give me this water so that I will not be thirsty or have to come here to draw water. She's like, well, okay, that sounds great, all right? Like, all right, so I don't have to be thirsty again, you know? I don't have to call the reverse osmosis filter guy to come change out my filter, right? Jesus said to her, now, so Jesus all of a sudden shifts gears, right? Because he knows, and he's the great counselor. You know, a great counselor will know how to work with where you are and bring it to really what's the underlying issue. So Jesus said to her, go, call your husband and come here. Right? And then it's kind of random, which we'll look at later. Verse 17, the woman answered him, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, you are right in saying, I have no husband. For you have had 5 husbands, and the one you now have is not your husband. What you have said is true. Now, can you imagine this woman? She's like, what? First of all, like, I just came here for water, and now she's talking like something about living water, something about eternal life. And he keeps avoiding my answer. He keeps avoiding my question, like, where's this living water? And now he's talking about my past, my shame. What's going on here? So then she goes, whoa, right? Verse 19. The woman said, sir, I perceive that you are a prophet. She's like, okay, there's more to this guy, right? There's more to him. But you notice that there's more to him, but she doesn't get it still. Because how do we know she doesn't get it? Because she calls him what? A prophet. Is Jesus a prophet? I'm sure you could write a paper on that. But is he more than a prophet? Oh, dramatically. He's God. He's the Son of God. Right? He is Lord. He's the one that tells the prophets what to say. Right? And so our fathers worship on this mountain, but you say that in Jerusalem is the place where people ought to worship. Jesus said to her, woman, believe me, the hour is coming when neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem will you worship the Father. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know. So he's bringing up this tension, this religious tension. Salvation is from the Jews, but the hour is coming and is now here. It's not something that's going to happen later. It is happening here. The great news is happening now, right now, and it's in front of you. When the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and truth, right? It's not about location. It's not about your ethnicity. It's not about your gender. It's not about your past. It's not about your background, right? It's about spirit and truth, right? Seeking after him. For the Father is seeking such people to worship him. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and truth. The woman said to him, I know that the Messiah is coming, he who is called Christ. When he comes, he will tell us all things. So she's, letting him know, like she knows this stuff, right? She knows. Again, we see that she knows. But her baseline, the default to what she knows, is limited, right? And so Jesus said to her, I who speak to you am he, right? I am that one. So it's like, but something happens, right? If we skip over to verse 39, many Samaritans from the town believed in him because of the woman's testimony. He told me all that I ever did. So she went from avoiding people because of shame and guilt. She then went to those same people. So when the Samaritans came to him, they asked him to stay with him, and he stayed with there 2 days. And many more believed because of his word. They said to the woman, it is no longer because of what you said. You see, this is like evangelism 101, right? Kind of a thing. It's no longer what you said that we believe. For we have heard that for ourselves, and we know that this is indeed the Savior of the world, right? Yeah, okay, so we'll end there. And we also see that she leaves her bucket, her what do you call it? I don't know what it's called, a jar, right, of water. So we see something like just this incredible conversation that she has with Jesus in the most unlikely place. Is that like a day-to-day place that you would go to out of necessity? And so we see that Jesus had to meet her. Jesus had to go there. So what's the first thing that Jesus reveals about where she is, right? He doesn't want her to settle for a shallow gift, right? You notice, I'm sorry, my notes are off here. I forgot to bold the first part. But the first thing that Jesus wants us to see and wants her to see and understand is he meets her where she's at. Notice Jesus doesn't approach her because she's in a good place spiritually. You notice that? Right? You notice that, okay, you've read the Bible, front and back, right? Because you are so faithful, because you've been praying for 20 days straight, because you've been fasting. Now, are all those things important? Of course. That is extremely important, and we should do that. But you notice what's happening here. Jesus meets her where she's at. So it's not like, so where is she now? Well, she's isolated, right? That's where she's at. She's isolated for so many different reasons. We could, for the fun, speculate why she's isolated. Well, notice that she wasn't with other people, especially back then. You don't travel alone, especially if you are a woman. You would actually travel in groups of other women, usually, right? And, just reflected the fact that she was avoiding people. She also has a reputation. And because of her reputation, she's that one. You know what I mean? Some of us, we know that one, right? And some of us are polite, so we don't say anything, but we can't help it sometimes, but we have a certain look like, she's coming, right? Or he's going to be there, right? Some of us are clever, so we hide that, but we're like, like that kind of a thing. It's very subtle. But she's that person. Culturally speaking, she's also isolated, right? Just a brief history, very, very poor man's, kindergarten level explanation of the tension between the Samaritans and the Jewish people was, so there was a time where once, I forgot which empire took over, but they had broken off Jerusalem, and so a lot of them had gone off. Israel had broken off Israel, so then a lot of Israelites had to get basically sent to other parts of the empire, and the ones that stayed behind then start to intermingle and start to intermarry, which is a huge no-no to the Jewish people. And so they intermarried with the neighboring countries that were now imported or exported into Israel. So because of that, because they did that, then that was a huge no-no. So when the Jewish people who were sent out finally came back, but they were faithful, they came back and were like, what have you guys done? How could you do this, right? And then that created this tension. They built their own temple. They all had their own ways. And so there was a lot of, just tension between the two. And so she's isolated, but Jesus still meets her. Just like he's meeting you where you are, right? Even when you made choices that you regret, you still regret. Even when you can't seem to shake off certain habits or patterns, Jesus doesn't pull away. He actually leans in. He comes to you. He talks to you. He meets you where you are. Not to condemn. Now, he may discipline, but to lift you up, to show you that his grace is so much deeper than your failure. Right? And so think of it relationally, I would never want my kids. Now, there are good days and bad days, okay? I would never want my kids to feel like they can only talk to me when, they maintain a 4.8 GPA, right? Now, I have good days and bad days, okay? Like, what? Only a 4.2? You're going to be homeless, right? Right? I have bad days. But, on good days, I would never want them, even if they mess up, even if I told them to clean up like they should clean up, or they didn't, or stop using 6-7 on me, even, just it's a lot of fighting at home. Don't use 6-7. I'm just kidding. I know when 6-7 is over, when parents use 6-7 more, and then kids are like, oh my gosh. And by the way, if your house still uses 6-7, you know how to kill it. If you're a parent, this is what I do, and it seems to work to my kids and their friends. I start counting on 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and you have to go all the way to 1,000. That's how you kill it, right? That's how you kill it. Just like I killed it with Sigma, with the Sigma. I started when they at restaurants ask for a name. I go Sigma, and then and my kids. So if you ever want to kill a movement, just get into it, right? But anyways, so I would never want my kids, even if they mess up, right, to ever feel like they had to go to me in a proper way. I just want them to run to me, or even if they mess up, I want them to know that I'm running to them and that they could trust me, right? They could trust me. And so now, most of us as parents, we want that and we desire that, right? Wouldn't you say? But yet we interact with God so differently sometimes. Now, yes, should we be respectful? Of course. But there's an intimacy that we see. The next thing is, he doesn't want her to settle for a shallow gift. She was asking, in verse 15, she was asking for living water, but maybe she was interpreting it just to avoid her daily chores, right? Maybe she's like, oh, wow, I can actually, if she's entrepreneurial, she's probably like, oh, I can actually make money off of this, right? I can offer living water, spring living water, right? And she could probably brand it the Messiah's living water, right? Or the prophet's living water, right? But Jesus doesn't let her settle. She's thinking practical, superficial terms. Important, don't get me wrong, but he's got something much greater to give. But we do that with God. We want him to give us shallow things, thinking it will satisfy, right? And some of us are old enough and have achieved enough to know that you've gotten to where you are, and that was your dream, that was your goal, but for some reason, it doesn't feel like it's enough. And for the rest of us, you feel like that target is always moving. It always feels like It's 20 steps ahead, and you just can't catch up, so that leaves you feeling less than. And you know what makes it worse? When you see everyone get to that mark, and you're still behind. What a horrible feeling. This college fellowship, it's one of those colleges that's harder to get into kind of a thing. And it's so amazing just to hear how some of them, they made it, they've done really well, they deserve to be at this college, but so many of them have imposter syndrome. So many of them feel like they can't keep up because this other person is so naturally smart, and they have to work so hard. And so it's so interesting. We think, just give me this, God, just give me that. But you'll find that it's not enough. Or you're always going to feel like you got to catch up, right? There's actually a study they call the hedonic treadmill. Have you ever heard of that? They based the study like on lottery winners. So the idea of a lottery winners, that they should be so happy. But they actually found that, so a hedonic treadmill is like, let's say your baseline is, your happiness level is a 6. And then the hope is, if I could get this next thing, my happiness level will go to like a 10, right? And let's say you win the lottery, like they've done this case study on, and these people do get to a 10. And then what happens? For some reason, it always goes back to their default 6, for whatever reason. In some ways, because of the wealth, it actually creates more problems, and so their level of happiness actually goes down, right? And now if you were like me, I'd think, if I would always stay at a 10, right? But it's just funny how that happens, right? And I think that's just an expression of our sinful nature. It's just never enough. Sin has no, doesn't know any way to satisfy that appetite, let's say. So, and think about it this way. How insulting is that to God, right? Right? I'm sure, I think we talked about this, how would you like it if people only talk to you because of what you do for them? How would you like it if there's certain people that, how they only talk to you because they need one specific thing from you, when you can offer so much more for them, right? And we do that with God, wouldn't you say? We reduce who God is by just making him into a God that gives us the shallow things that we need. And so how does Jesus address this shallow desire, right? He confronts her by asking her, where's your husband? Right? Now, again, when we look at this, it just feels like one of those conversations if you had a map, you're like, oh yeah, I can see where Jesus is taking her. All of a sudden, where's he taking her? And it's so rude, It's like some of us, it's like so where's that straight A, right? That could be some of us. Or where's that love of your life that you've been looking for, right? Where's that career, right? And, so I was like, why would he do that? Well, what he's doing here is, and so amazing what Jesus is doing here, he's cutting to the heart. He's saying, where's that thing you thought would love you? Where's that man you thought that would protect you? Where's that man that you thought would always be there? Where's that thing that you thought would satisfy you? What has it done to you? Where has that pursuit for that thing, what has it done to you? Can't you see, when Jesus is saying, where is that husband? He's saying to her, can't you see what it is doing to you? You keep looping and trying to find your satisfaction in a man. But just like this well, you keep coming back. You keep coming back. But each time you come back, you're more isolated, you're angrier, you're lonelier, and you also have certain habits that now you picked up. So he's saying, can't you see what it's doing to you? So he's asking us, he's asking you, where is that thing, right? And what has it done? You see, Jesus is focusing on the deeper issue for this woman, and for you and I. We are seeking security, love, fulfillment, and other things, and that's why we can't be satisfied. In Jeremiah 2, he says, "My people have committed two sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water." And some of the Old Testament curses that God gives the Israelites, it's like, you will work but never be satisfied. You will build your house, but someone else will live in it. You will strive but never have enough. So interesting, right? But see what Jesus is doing here? He doesn't give in. Sometimes God may not be giving you what you want because maybe God is not giving in. He's saying, I have so much more for you. And now I'm not going to let you have that, so you have to go deeper. You have to go look beyond this thing and see that I'm the one. I'm the one. Even though it doesn't seem physically tangible, but spiritually, emotionally, and eternally, it's everything. And so I have something so much greater. And so it shows us that Jesus wanting to meet us where we are, and he doesn't settle. He doesn't want us to settle for shallow things. But then he offers her living water, right? What is his living water? It's him. His love. His relationship. It's living water. And there's no other greater way of demonstrating that than to die on the cross, wouldn't you say? But death doesn't have a hold on him. Why? Because he's the living water. Right? What does he, as a living water, do for her and for you and I? He pursues her. It's a living water that reveals his love to her. And it's a living water that is a gift. Right? It's a gift. The only thing that she needs to do is to receive the gift. It's like, you don't know, you won't know how strong God is, how God can catch you until you let God catch you. Right? So Jesus' living water gives her peace, gives her salvation, and satisfaction. So what happens when we truly taste and see his living water, who he is? Well, she leaves her water jar, her water jug. Does that mean we abandon our responsibilities? No. Then you've missed it. In fact, you would pursue the things and the places God has called you to, but you do it for a different reason. Not for satisfaction, but you're coming from a place of satisfaction. What a difference in how your activity goes. What a difference in how your responsibility goes. You want to hire someone, if you're an upper management person, you want to hire someone that's coming from a place of scarcity or from abundance, but they choose out of abundance what they want to do because it gives them pleasure. It gives them joy, right? The scarcity at first sounds good, but then they will run out because they're coming from a scarcity. And a scarcity, for some of us, does not change. And that's where some of us who are successful, some of us grew up in scarcity, and you're like, how come we have everything we need, but still not enough? I'm still planning as if disaster will happen. It's the scarcity. So, what can we do? We can let him meet us where we are and show us that there's something much greater and much deeper, right? So, when I was growing up, there was this, my dad knew this, this Vietnamese, and maybe some of you grew up with this. There was always one uncle or someone that you knew that was that voodoo Chinese herbal doctor. You know those ones that do miracles, right? Like your head fell off, and there's stories of someone's head falling off, and they put it back on, and they lived again, kind of a thing. And so I knew one of those. And you know what? The funniest one, if you never knew anyone like this or never knew about these things, it's really funny, right? Because a lot of these prestigious Chinese doctors, right? You would think it would be in the nice like storefront, herbal, save your life kind of branding. But it's always in the back of a bakery, right? It's always in the back of some like warehouse, right? Anyone know what I'm talking about? And so one day I sprained my ankle. My dad's like, hey, I know this Vietnamese, Chinese doctor, during the war, people like died, but he came out and his herbal medicine brought him back to life to fight against the communists, right? Kind of a thing. So I was like, so if he could bring people back to life, he could restore my ankle so I could play basketball, right? The important things, compare war, the war playing on basketball court, right? Anyways, so, it takes me there, and it's amazing. It's like, wow, it's amazing. He just did something with my ankles, and there's like pain, like incredible pain. And he just put it back in place somehow. And I was like, I got over my ankle sprain for like within like 3 days or 2 days or something like that. Even took the swelling down right away. And the medicine he gave me to put on my ankle was really funny because this is amazing medicine, but it was in a used Starbucks glass bottle. That kind of, that's how gangster the guy is. He's like, this medicine's so good, I don't need packaging, right? So here's the thing, right? Here's my wish that I wish I did more of back then. I would only go to him when I had, some sprain or something like that, right? Unfortunately, he had died by the time I had my ACL had tore, and my meniscus, and my Achilles. I would have gone to him. Probably my wife would have, just panicked. But anyways, but you know what I wish? I wish I spent time with him. What is greater? The things that he did, which is helpful, obviously, it's huge. But just to know him and his stories, but just to know the other part of him, his warmth. His sense of just a safe person that you can always go to. And maybe that's what God is offering to you. And so maybe this can change the way you interact with God. And as we close, maybe this is what you can do this next week. Instead of going to your usual default things to just relax, go to him. Just read the Bible. Right? I think having a reading Bible plan helps, by the way, but just read the Bible. Pray to him. When you're stressed out and you start to do that rabbit hole and spiral down, go to him first. Take God with you in that rabbit hole so that you can see that he will bring you up out of it. Go to him. I know it sounds so overly simple. I wish there was a way I could clarify it so that everything is just like whoosh, But it's that simple, but it's also that hard to go to. So let's not settle for our defaults. Let's go to him. Heavenly Father, we thank you that, God, you are a God that offers us so much more. You don't let us settle for the shallow things. But you are so good, God. Sometimes you allow us to have it just because, God, you're a loving Father that just delights when he sees his children just happy. But you're also a loving Father that sometimes, God, you would withhold. Sometimes you allow certain situations to happen so that, God, we don't stay settled on just the shallow things, but we look deeper to you. And wow, the things that you offer. But more importantly, we're so grateful that you offer yourself to us. So this next week, maybe, whatever that looks like, God. If we have to remove something in our schedule, or we need to do something with our schedule, God, help us to go to you. In Jesus' name.